The Pacific Northwest can be a stunningly beautiful and unique place in the fall, a picturesque canvas of vibrant autumn hues. But at times, thick fog chokes the life out of an otherwise serene landscape, and seasonal rains seem to wash away the outward facade, revealing its dark secrets for just a moment. Somewhere in the woods of Olalla, Washington, sits an abandoned cemetery. Its tombstones are as decayed and forgotten as the names of some of the small seaside communities early Scandinavian immigrants engraved on them. But maybe it was abandoned for good reason, because not only does this cemetery hold the remains of some of Olalla's early settlers, but also the story of one of Washington's most notorious psychopathic serial killers. Hey, what's up explorers, and thanks for tuning in. Now, as many of you know, I have dedicated this channel not just to exploring interesting places, but to peeling back the layers and finding the stories that make those places unique. Sometimes those stories can be happy and uplifting, other times not so much, as you'll soon find out in this video. Now, I don't know why, but my last two videos have been true crime oriented. I didn't mean for that to happen, it just kind of happened that way. My last video, of course, was on the 1947 Newport yacht murders. If you didn't see it, I'll put a link here above so you can check that one out as well. But a few weeks ago, I stumbled upon the story of a small seaside community on Puget Sound called Olalla, and one of its notorious residents named Dr. Linda Burfield Hazzard. After reading Gregg Olsen's novel titled Starvation Heights, I became eager to check the area out. So a couple weeks ago, I spent the weekend in the Seattle metropolitan area to experience more for myself. I can't wait to tell you all about it, so make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications. Now, I have some notes here because this story takes a lot of twists and turns, but bear with me and we will get through it. Today, the bustling port city of Seattle is the largest city in Washington and is home to a number of large companies, including Starbucks Coffee, Boeing, and even Costco. But just over 100 years ago, this modern progressive city was just in its infancy. It had just been rebuilt on top of the ashes from the Great Seattle Fire of 1889, which completely leveled the entire central business district. Up until this time, Seattle had a reputation of being open and lawless, and this might have been what attracted one Dr. Linda Burfield Hazzard, a self-proclaimed doctor, osteopath, and fasting specialist who lacked any formal training, but as you'll soon see, her only true occupation was being a quack. Linda Hazzard began pursuing her career in Minneapolis, and in 1902, her first patient named Gertrude Young died under her care of apparent starvation after undergoing a 40-day fast prescribed by Hazzard. At the time, the Hennepin County coroner launched an official inquiry into Gertrude's death with hopes of bringing murder charges against Linda Hazzard. But in the end, the panel of 3 physicians conducting the inquest couldn't bring any official charges against Linda because she technically wasn't a doctor, and Gertrude was a willing participant in her own treatment. While in Minneapolis, Linda falls in love with and marries a man named Samuel Chrisman Hazzard, who was a real piece of work.
He's a very unprofessional guy. I mean, you talk about somebody that's a loser.
He's been described as a drunk, a lecher, and a swindler. Not something you really want to be remembered as. But for Linda, her marriage to Sam was most likely more of a strategic business decision than it was an act of love. And that's because she believed his former army experience, his confidence, and his handsome masculine appearance would lend credibility to her practice. But as it turns out, Sam Hazzard was dishonorably discharged from the army for misappropriating army funds, had been married twice before, and apparently forgot to officially divorce one of his ex-wives because when he went to marry Linda, he was charged with bigamy and sentenced to 2 years in the Minnesota State Prison.
Oops.
But while in prison, Sam had made plans to leave Linda and reconcile his relationship with his ex-wife. But Linda wouldn't have any of that because it didn't fit her plans. So after visiting Sam in prison only once, she somehow managed to woo him over, and when he was released from prison in 1906, the two left for Seattle to start over. Now, the choice to move to Seattle was also most likely a strategic business move for Linda because at the time, the state of Washington's medical licensing law had a loophole that grandfathered in certain practitioners of alternative medicine who lacked formal training or an official medical degree. Thus, Linda Hazzard got to call herself a doctor.
Hi, everybody!
It was during her time in Seattle that Linda Hazzard planned to build a large health sanitarium in neighboring Olalla, and she even published several books, including one titled Fasting for the Cure of Disease, which caught the attention of two wealthy British heiresses and hypochondriacs who were on holiday in neighboring Vancouver, British Columbia. Dorothea and Claire Williamson were sisters in their early 30s with an estate worth somewhere in the tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money. They, not too unlike the wealthy elite of today, were drawn to unorthodox medicine and alternative treatments. So after reading Dr. Hazzard's book and learning of her Institute for Natural Therapeutics in Olalla, they rushed down to Seattle and were eager to enlist themselves under the care of Dr. Linda Hazzard. The area that makes up today's Seattle metropolitan area, including the small town of Olalla, had been inhabited for at least 4,000 years by the Chinookan and Salish peoples before the first European settlers arrived in the late 18th century. Located west of Seattle, Olalla purportedly got its name after an early Scandinavian settler mistook the Chinookan word Olali, meaning berry, for the actual name of the village. In its early days, the community flourished during the heydays of logging, farming, and boat building, but today it has become a quiet rural commuter town. When the Williamson sisters arrived in Seattle in 1911, they were disappointed to find out that Dr. Hazzard's sanitarium in Olalla was still under construction and hadn't quite opened. But they were eager to start their fasting treatments, so they rented a room at the Seattle Buena Vista apartment building, which is still standing today, where Dr. Hazzard began administering a litany of odd regimens. These included only 1 or 2 small meals per day of a light vegetable broth, daily enemas that sometimes went hours on end.
An enema?
Yes, it'll give him a feeling of accomplishment.
And a bizarre massage therapy session which involved Dr. Hazzard beating her fists against the sisters' foreheads and backs while shouting odd exorcism-like expressions.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
This went on for nearly 2 months before the sisters were transferred to the sanitarium in Olalla, but by this point the sisters had lost an alarming amount of weight and were almost completely delirious. It was around this time that the sisters' childhood nanny named Margaret Conway received a cryptic telegram at her home in Sydney, Australia from Claire, asking her to leave for Olalla immediately and come visit them. After she arrived at Dr. Hazzard's Seattle office, Margaret was blindsided by Dr. Hazzard's matter-of-factly delivered news that Claire had died and Dorothea was mentally insane. Great, what the hell happened? Margaret visited Dr. Hazzard's sanitarium where she found Dorothea, who now weighed only 60 pounds, and found out that Dr. Hazzard had swindled Claire into changing her will before her death. Other emaciated patients came up to Margaret in secret and begged her for some help. Margaret Conway leaves the sanitarium and immediately gets in touch with the sisters' uncle, who lived in Portland, Oregon, who came down to help rescue Dorothea from the Hazzards. The Hazzards reluctantly agreed, but not before demanding payment of $2,000, which is roughly equivalent to $55,000 in today's money. Linda Hazzard was arrested in 1911 and charged with the murder of Claire Williamson. At the end of her sensationalized trial, she was found guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter and sentenced to 2 to 20 years in the state penitentiary at Walla Walla, but not before killing 2 more of her patients.
Oops.
Hazzard was released on parole in 1915 after serving just 2 years and received a full pardon by Governor Ernest Lister. She and Sam skipped town for New Zealand, where she began practicing as a dietitian and osteopath until the New Zealand government charged her under the Medical Practitioners Act for practicing medicine without a license. In 1920, she and Sam moved back to Olalla, where she opened another sanitarium where she supervised fasts. Fast forward 18 years, and Linda Hazzard passes away at the age of 70 in 1938 while undergoing her own fasting treatment. In all, there were at least 19 deaths attributed to Dr. Linda Hazzard, including her own. In each of the cases, her patients were prescribed 1 or 2 small meals of light vegetable broth per day, in addition to undergoing Dr. Hazzard's crazy regimens. At the time, it was tough for prosecutors to build a strong enough case against Linda Hazzard because she technically wasn't a doctor and all of her patients were willing participants in their own treatments. In retrospect, it's easy to see now that Linda Burfield Hazzard was nothing more than a psychopathic confidence trickster who fooled vulnerable people into thinking her crackpot treatments were somehow curing their ailments. Linda Hazzard's sanitarium long since burned to the ground, but the property she once called Wilderness Heights earned the more aptly fitting name of Starvation Heights by locals. So that is the story of Linda Burfield Hazzard and the small community of Olalla, Washington. I did find out while I was there that one of Linda's victims, a man by the name of Ivar Haglund, was just a small child when his mother was killed by Dr. Hazzard, and he himself was a patient of Linda. But he went on to form the successful seafood restaurant in Seattle called Ivar's. So in a classic case of a bad situation turning for good, while Linda Hazzard murdered Ivar's mom, Ivar's clam chowder literally goes on to feed millions. Anyway, I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and if I've left anything out or if you have anything else to add, please let me know in the comments down below. Remember to eat something today, and as always, remember to never stop exploring.